Forget everything Hollywood told you about Indigenous women. They're not romantic princesses, and they're not helpless victims. The real story is way more complex and more disturbing. Some led entire nations, deciding on war and peace. Others ran rituals that would make any man shake. And many had their power traditions systematically erased. Here's the truth no one ever showed you. Number 1. Did you know that long before the Founding Fathers were debating democracy, the Iroquois nations were already practicing something that would leave a lot of people speechless? Women ran the show, seriously. The so-called clan mothers had a kind of power few people know about. They chose the tribal chiefs, and if the guy couldn't handle the job, they'd simply fire him. No voting, no runaround. These matriarchs decided on war and peace, controlled the land and the food. Benjamin Franklin studied the Iroquois system when he helped create our own form of government. But here's the detail history books usually skip. When European colonizers arrived, they realized that this female power made the tribes hard to manipulate. The solution? Force the European patriarchal model into negotiations, weakening the structure that had worked for centuries. Number 2. Lozen, the woman American soldiers were afraid to run into. She never married, never had kids. She chose war. The Apache called her the shield of the people because she could do something nobody could explain. She'd stretch out her arms, sing a prayer, and her hands would tingle in the exact direction the enemy was coming from. It worked every time. Lozen rode alongside her brother Victorio in campaigns against the U.S. Army in New Mexico and Arizona. When he died in 1880, she joined Geronimo. Military records from that time confirm she fought in battles like any other warrior. General George Crook described her as one of the most dangerous people he ever faced. For years, she slipped past every attempt to capture her. But in 1886, she surrendered along with Geronimo. She was sent to a prison in Florida, where she contracted tuberculosis. She died behind bars, far from the mountains she knew. Number 3. Sacagawea. You know the story of the young woman who guided Lewis and Clark through unknown territory, but school books left out some details that change everything. First, there's a serious dispute about who she really was. Official documents say she was Shoshone, but Hidatsa oral traditions tell a different story about her origins. And there's more. The version we learned says she died young, around 1812, when she was only in her early 20s. But Hidatsa elders passed down for generations a completely different story. According to them, Sacagawea lived until 1869 and died violently, shot. That's almost 60 years of difference. Why does this discrepancy exist? Some researchers argue there was an interest in simplifying her story, making it less uncomfortable for the narrative of American progress. A Native woman who lived that long would have witnessed the systematic destruction of her people. That would really complicate the myth of a peaceful westward expansion. Number 4. Before Europeans arrived, Cherokee women ran the show in a way that would leave a lot of people speechless today. They owned the houses, the land, and everything the family produced. If the marriage didn't work out, the woman would just put her husband's stuff out the door and that was it. Done. She kept the kids. No debate, no court. Kinship followed the mother's line, not the father's. Men still had important roles in hunting and war, but the real wealth passed from mother to daughter. When the U.S. government forced assimilation in the 19th century, it imposed laws that transferred property to men and stripped women of that power that had existed for centuries. An entire social structure was taken apart in just a few decades. Think about it. While white American women fought for the basic right to own property, Cherokee women had already lost rights they'd had for generations. Number 5. The Navajo had a ritual called Kinaaldá that marked a girl's passage into adulthood. For 4 days, the young woman had to wake up before sunrise and run toward the east, going farther each day. She couldn't eat salt or meat, and she spent hours grinding corn to make a huge cake cooked underground. Elders believed that during this time, she was connected to a special force, and everything she did would shape her future. Here's the detail few people know. When the colonizers arrived, they saw this tradition as a direct threat. In Navajo tribes, women controlled property and family decisions. Banning Kinaaldá wasn't just about fighting different beliefs. It was a calculated strategy to tear down the female power that held up the entire social structure of the Navajo Nation. Number 6. Hopi women in Arizona held a role few people know about. They were the true keepers of corn seeds, considered sacred for generations. They controlled when to plant, when to harvest, and which varieties to preserve. That power over food gave them real influence in community decisions. Fertility rituals included dances that Christian missionaries considered inappropriate and worked to eliminate. Hopi elder women were also responsible for interpreting ancient prophecies about cycles of destruction and renewal of the world. When the missions arrived, many of these traditions were banned or forced underground. The knowledge started being passed on in secret. Even today, the Hopi keep their ceremonies closed to outsiders, protecting what's left after centuries of attempts to erase their culture. Number 7. The Anasazi dominated the American Southwest for centuries, building impressive cities into cliff walls. But something went very wrong around the year 1100. Archaeologists found human bones with cut marks, signs of boiling, and even broken open to extract marrow. Here's the disturbing detail. Residue analyses from pots confirmed human protein. For decades, academics avoided the topic. It didn't fit the narrative of the peaceful native living in harmony. Devastating droughts and social collapse may have forced terrible choices. Some evidence suggests women took part in these survival rituals. It wasn't cruelty, it was total desperation. Entire tribes disappeared during this mysterious period. Pueblo descendants still prefer not to talk about it today. The real history isn't always pretty, but it deserves to be told the way it happened. Number 8. While the men of the Plains tribes talked about wars and hunts, the women developed something the colonizers could never figure out. It was a system of hand signals, facial expressions, and subtle movements that went completely unnoticed by the men around them. With this invisible language, they negotiated marriages, shared information about resources, and even formed alliances between tribes that were officially rivals. Think about it. While tribal leaders met in formal councils, their wives had already worked everything out behind the scenes, without anyone knowing. When U.S. authorities discovered this system, the reaction was immediate. They separated families, banned gatherings between women from different tribes, and punished anyone caught using these gestures. Why were they so afraid of women talking in silence? Because they realized that's where the real power to keep communities united was. Number 9. The Pawnee had a ritual called Morning Star that will make you rethink everything you think you know about Indigenous peoples. Here's the detail nobody talks about. It was women who led the tribe's most important ceremonies. They had a direct connection to the stars and ran rituals that decided the fate of prisoners of war. When the colonizers arrived, they were horrified and banned it all, calling it barbaric. But think about it. Those same colonizers held public hangings as Sunday entertainment. The difference? The Pawnee ritual had deep spiritual meaning tied to celestial cycles. The fallout from the ban was devastating. It erased centuries of female religious authority that existed long before any European ever set foot on this continent. This story rarely shows up in school books. Number 10. The Zuni of New Mexico built something few Americans know about. For centuries, women truly ran the show in that society. They owned the houses, controlled the land, and decided who married who. When a man got married, he basically moved in with his wife's family and lived by her rules. If the marriage didn't work out, the woman would simply put his stuff outside the door. End of story. The children belonged to the mother's clan, not the father's. This system worked for generations until the U.S. government and missionaries showed up in the 19th century. Boarding schools separated children from their families and imposed the Christian family model with the man in charge. Many Zuni resisted, but the damage was done. What's interesting is that some matriarchal traditions still survive today on the reservations. Number 11. The Seminole never officially surrendered to the United States. During the Seminole Wars in Florida, between 1817 and 1858, something happened that the government preferred to leave out of the history books. Women from the tribe took up arms and fought side by side with the men in the Everglades swamps. They knew every inch of that treacherous ground and used it to set up ambushes against U.S. troops. The soldiers didn't even know who was shooting at them in the middle of that thick vegetation. The Army lost more than 1,500 men in this conflict, the most expensive of the Indian Wars. And here's the part few people know. Military reports from the time mentioned fighters who didn't fit the expected profile, but those details were conveniently ignored. Admitting that women were defeating trained soldiers didn't look good for the image of the most powerful army on the continent. Number 12. Among the Lakota, when a young woman got her first period, it wasn't shameful. It was a celebration. The community built a special lodge where she stayed for 4 days, receiving visits from older women who taught her the secrets of adult life. The Lakota believed that during this time, a woman was at the height of her spiritual power, directly connected to the moon and the cycles of nature. Men respected that force and kept their distance, not out of disgust, but out of reverence. When the missionaries arrived, they were horrified. They called all of it sin and filth. They banned the lodges, forcing women to hide what used to be honored. In a few generations, something that meant power became a source of shame. The question is, who really understood the female body better? Number 13. Among the Haida, a people of the Pacific Northwest, women held knowledge that few could access. They were the only ones allowed to tattoo members of the community. Every mark on the skin told the story of a family, a clan, a lineage passed down from mother to daughter. The process was brutal. They used needles made of bone and ink from soot mixed with fat. The pain was part of the ritual. When the Canadian government banned potlatches, the ceremonies where these traditions were passed on, something broke. Whole generations grew up without learning the meanings of those symbols. Today, young Haida try to recover what was almost lost, searching for elder women who still remember fragments of this art. A tradition that survived for centuries, almost disappeared in just a few decades. Number 14. In Inuit communities, there were women known as Angakuk, who held a role few people could pull off. They went into deep trance states, and according to tradition, their souls traveled to other realms in search of healing and answers. During these rituals, it was believed that animal spirits temporarily took over their bodies. Bears, seals, and ravens were some of the beings said to show up through them. These practices worked for generations across the Arctic. But when Christian missionaries arrived in the region, they saw something completely different. To them, it was nothing but pure witchcraft. A systematic persecution began, and many of these healers were hunted as if they were demonic threats. Ancient traditions were destroyed in just a few decades. Number 15. For centuries, Hopi women in Arizona kept a secret that few people know about. They maintained underground chambers called Kivas, where they held ceremonies to preserve corn seeds that were more than 1,000 years old. What's interesting is that these guardians said the seeds sent messages through visions during the rituals. Each corn variety had a specific purpose and was considered a living being with its own spirit. When farmers arrived in the region in the 19th century, many of these practices were disrupted. Fertile lands were taken, and the government banned traditional ceremonies for decades. Even so, some families kept hiding seeds in secret places. Today, researchers have found that these ancient varieties are more drought-resistant than modern crops, proving those women knew something science took generations to understand. Number 16. The Miwok of California developed a medical practice that left the first European settlers completely baffled. Their healers mastered the use of toxic plants like Datura, popularly known as Devil's Trumpet. The procedure was risky. They gave carefully measured doses that put the patient into a deep unconscious state, sometimes for days. During that time, they believed the person traveled between worlds and came back transformed, free of illness or trauma. It was literally dying to live again. When colonial authorities learned about this tradition, they were horrified. They couldn't tell the ritual apart from an attempt at murder or suicide. They banned the practice and persecuted the healers. Knowledge about safe dosages almost disappeared. Ironically, modern science confirms that some of these plants contain compounds now being studied for psychiatric treatments. Number 17. Before Europeans arrived, Ojibwe women held knowledge that few people had access to. They were part of the Midewiwin, a society that had existed for centuries and passed wisdom from generation to generation. These women knew medicinal plants, knew how to treat illnesses, and led ceremonies that lasted all night. They used sacred objects, including animal bones, in rituals most of the tribe never witnessed. The U.S. government considered these practices dangerous. For decades, federal agents banned the ceremonies and sent children to boarding schools far from their families. The intention was clear: to erase all of it from memory. Many of these women kept practicing in secret, risking harsh punishments. Today, some Ojibwe communities are working to reclaim what almost got lost forever. Number 18. The Crow were one of the few tribes that allowed certain women to take on warrior roles. These people were called Two-Spirit and held a special place in Indigenous society. One of the most famous was Woman Chief, who lived in the 19th century and led war expeditions against rival tribes. She was so respected that she even sat in the men's councils, something almost unheard of. The Crow didn't see this as strange. To them, a person's spirit could carry both male and female energy. When a woman showed exceptional skill in combat or hunting, the tribe simply accepted her path. Woman Chief built up wealth, had wives, and died in battle, living exactly like the male warriors of her time. This tradition challenges a lot of what we think we know about gender roles in ancient cultures. Number 19. The Chumash lived on the California coast long before Europeans arrived. They had ceremonies that might seem strange today, but they made total sense to them. When the land dried up and crops died, women took part in fertility rituals. They danced without clothes because they believed the human body connected with the forces of nature. It wasn't about sex. It was pure religion, their way. Then Spanish priests arrived with their missions. They looked at that and saw sin. Their solution, a whip across the back to save souls. Thousands of native people were forced to abandon traditions that had existed for centuries. Many died from disease, others from heartbreak, really. What's left of Chumash culture today are fragments, cave paintings, a few tools, stories passed down by word of mouth. It makes you think, who had the right to decide which belief was valid? Number 20. The Nootka Matriarchs. Forget everything you've heard about native peoples living in perfect harmony before Columbus showed up. The reality was a lot more complicated. The Nootka, who lived on the Pacific Northwest coast, had a system of slavery that had been in place for centuries. And here's the part nobody talks about. The ones running that trade were women. The matriarchs controlled the buying, selling, and trading of enslaved people between different tribes. Prisoners of war and people captured in raids became property. This was happening long before any European ever set foot on that land. Why have you never heard about it? Because this story doesn't fit the romanticized image the books prefer to show. The truth is, human societies anywhere in the world have always had their dark sides. Recognizing that doesn't diminish anyone. It just shows that real history is a lot more complex than any simplified version.